Hey, everybody, welcome back to Salt the Streets podcast, the show where we discuss news, government, and culture, and how it all pertains to you, the individual, and your natural rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I, as always, am one of your co-hosts. I am that big bird-looking fella they call Colin, and unfortunately today, I am not joined by my co-host, brother-in-arms, the Nero of Neoprene, the original Salt of the Streets himself. Donavan is out hard sick with a nasty migraine today. So after a little bit of discussion between me and him this morning, we decided to just carry on the best we can, considering I had some personal issues going on last show, and we just didn't really want to let another show day go by without at least something for you fine fellas. Zeke, Bilbo Swaggins, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming back, everybody. Good to see you guys. Today is going to be, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a, probably a shorter show. I don't know if I have the wherewithal myself to go on 6 hours by myself, but we're going to do the best we can. Hey, so right off the bat, we're going to be diving into two major topics today. The original two main segments that Donovan and I had been planning for the last few weeks. And that is going to be, as you might have seen in the thumbnail, segment one is going to be what we call spend, where we're going to be discussing the the current state of inflation. We're going to be looking at the Inflation Reduction Act, aptly named, obviously, and a little bit of the spending in regard to the war in Ukraine. And then after that, segment two, we're going to be talking about the powers that be. And that's going to be diving into, of course, the ongoing shit show that is the raid on the former president's house and the current investigation going by the FBI and so on and so forth regarding, former President Donald Trump and what he may or may not have been doing. And, of course, the entire infrastructure and design of the FBI and some of the problems behind it, and then just overall the major powers at play here that are, as always, ever trying to control every inch of your life. So without any further ado, today is August 20th. This is episode 131, and the time is approximately 12:13 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So without any further ado, let's jump into today's mini episode. The first thing I wanted to do in particular, Donovan isn't here, but I do have something of a let me ask you this question that I'm going to pose to you, the audience out there who's listening or watching. And Donovan, when you're feeling better, you can pick up on this yourself. But I wanted to ask, considering everything that's going on these days and some of the themes that we talk about here on the show, and particularly for lack of a better term, the ideologies that we have essentially prescribed ourselves to, the morals and the ethics that we've been diving into and discovering for ourselves. When you find yourself agreeing or aligning with a set of values and morals and ethics that may not necessarily align to the societal structure, the governmental structure that we currently find ourselves in our everyday reality. How is it that you balance your ideological morals and ethics with the current reality that we find ourselves in? And so for me, I like to think of myself as an anarchist. I don't believe that the de facto authority of the state, which you had zero, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, it's always right on the tip of my tongue. You had zero, you didn't agree to it at all. It's not the word I'm looking for, but we're going to go with it. I didn't agree to this. I didn't consent. There it is. I did not consent to this structure at all, the structure of authority that is imposed over me, and thus I believe that it does not have the right to dictate my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It is not okay in my book. There is zero de facto authority that I have essentially signed on to. And so I that's like the boilerplate level of why I find myself as an anarchist. I don't believe that anybody should have some kind of de facto authority to just clamp down on your rights and how you live and so on and so forth. But I am confronted with the reality of the situation that we all find ourselves living in. We don't live in an anarchist society, and I don't think that realistically, I don't think we ever will, at least not in my lifetime. So how is it that I balance my morals and ethics taken from my research and my readings and investigations into anarchism? How do I balance that with this crazy giant governmental system that we find ourselves in today? And for me, I guess the easiest way for me to look at it is when I truly boil it down, the individual rights aspect of things is the most important. Your individual liberties and freedom is the most important thing. In this country, we have a pretty decent set of moral guidelines laid out in the Bill of Rights that I think is a pretty good guidepost that, as somebody that prescribes himself as an anarchist, I could easily kind of flex myself to get to that place where that it's okay for me to have some form of a federal government if we were to prescribe to only those aspects laid out in the Constitution. Or if I really, really wanted to get into it, I'd say let's nix the Constitution. Let's just focus more on the Articles of Confederation. But I also understand that that's not even a reality anymore either. The federal government has grown to a size that is untenable, obviously, as we'll later discuss, I think, mostly in part 2 today. But if I was to move forward and continue to exist and participate in the system of representative democracy that we have in America, using our system in place of voting for representation, if I could appeal to or look for representatives that truly embody the values centered around my own values based in anarchism, with the exception of the state has to exist, then that would be something that I think I could use on balance to justify my existence and participation in this insane system that we have today. Let me see. Bilbo, I believe all people should be able to dictate their self. We should be responsible enough for that. Government only needs to take care of infrastructure, military, and foreign affairs. That's about my tilt right there, Bilbo. There's a lot of hard questions, and if you guys are subscribers to our Patreon, I know I'm not a huge fan of Patreon, but hey, you got to have some kind of system to work within, right? Like we just talked about. We put out a monthly newsletter, and I am working on an ongoing series now, kind of describing some of my takes on anarchism and looking at some of the stereotypes and falsehoods that are painted around that. And in one of the pieces upcoming, there will be discussion on some of what I call the hard issues in anarchy, and that is definitely one of them. I could get around infrastructure pretty easily. I don't think that needs to be involved at a governmental level. But when it comes to especially things like military and foreign affairs, those are really hard questions to tackle when it comes to my own anarchist views and my values. There are prescribed ways or proposed ways that may get around that kind of system, but it's really easy at that point to start devolving away from that ultra decentralized individual right and consenting authority. At that point, it gets really difficult to do that without some form of a very largely agreed upon system of, no other term, but authority for that. So yeah, that is this episode's Let Me Ask You This. Bilbo Swaggins, thanks for that, buddy. That was great. So there was one thing I did want to cover real quick before diving into today's main topic, some light banter, if you will, on the pop culture side of things. I just finished up last night. It's it's a heavy lift to watch this thing because it's basically a movie at this point. But me and my wife have worked our way through the latest season of Stranger Things, and I have gone from relatively resident and not exactly fully on board the first, say, third of the season to, after polishing off last night's 2.5 hour long season finale, I can safely say that I enjoyed this season. I was an overall fan of it, and I still continue to look forward to next season because no spoilers or anything, but they certainly did. I mean, they could go cut for cut, scene for scene, continue on into a season 5 if they so please, and I would imagine they would, because I feel like when it comes to the Netflix world, Stranger Things is probably one of, if not the cornerstone of the entire Netflix business model at this point. Spending time with the girl, William Wallace. Thanks for stopping by, buddy. I miss you. I hope everything is great in your side of the world. Zeke, I don't know if I said what up to you, but always good to see you here. So without any further delay, let's jump into today's first segment. And this is perfect because I didn't come up with any of these names. I got to give all the credit to Donavan on this one. It's what we're calling spend, baby. Let's see. Switching over. Boom. Here we go. So we're going to dive into spend, looking at inflation, the ridiculously named Inflation Reduction Act, and, of course, the insane spending going to the conflict in Ukraine. Bilbo Swaggins, I loved season 1, didn't care for 2, season 1, didn't care for 2, and never saw 3. I will say season 2, we'll just hammer this out real quick before we dive into the inflation talk. Season 2 for me was also kind of I didn't really get into it that much. Season 3, I was really hesitant and I only got into it because I was like, well, it's Stranger Things. I got to watch this. And if it turns into just another Game of Thrones pile of, crap, then it's over for me and I never have to watch it again. But then I found myself actually enjoying season 3. I'd say give it a shot. As per most shows, you got to give it a few episodes. And I know that's a big time commitment when it comes to something like Stranger Things because those episodes are not short. But by the end of season 3, I was happy with it. And then, again, that brought me right into season 4, which I, in retrospect now, thoroughly enjoyed throughout the whole thing. One day, if I'm feeling really, really crazy, I might just try to hash my way through the entirety of all 4 seasons again and see how they stack up back to back to back to back to back. And when it comes to a show like Stranger Things or even like Game of Thrones, we really think about it, having a year or 2 in between seasons, that's no way to tell a story, man. That's no way to tell a story. If you're involved in like a book series, like I have one of my favorite authors is a fantasy author named Michael J. Sullivan. He writes all of his books out at once before even bringing them to the publishers or the editors, or anything like that. And that way he knows no matter what happens, the old Stephen King problem of like what happens if I get hit by a bus and then I can't finish the season off. That never comes into play. So no matter what happens, everything comes out in a timely manner and the whole story can be told. I understand with television is different because they don't. I would guarantee that there is not such a thing as season 5 of Stranger Things written right now. But who knows? I would hope that they do, and then at that point I want to get that whole Stranger Things story arc at once to really weigh it out as a whole. It's hard to do with long-running shows, obviously, and even Stranger Things being an hour plus per episode is really difficult. Anyways, enough of that. Let's get back to inflation. Boom. Inflation rate. As of this past month, when they assessed inflation the way they always assess inflation, which I have a hard enough time on its own, but working within the structure that we work within, the CPI, balance on with the PPI and things like that, the various price indexes. Inflation, I don't want to say fell, but the rate of inflation was slower in July than it was in June by I think it was like 1%, less than 1%. It went from 9.1% year over year to 8.5. That, on its whole, was sold to the American people, particularly by the White House and President Joe Biden, as we had zero inflation this month, which was an absolute fucking lie. Which should surprise nobody, because if there's anything the White House is good at, it's lying to the American people. But what we have now is still one of the highest inflation levels in our living history at this point. I think for most anybody that's alive now, unless you're a boomer, this is the highest we've seen since the 80s, since the late 70s. 8.5 is still terrible. Now, why did it go down a little bit, though? Why did it go down? Is this a sign of things getting better? No, it's not. I can tell you that right now. One of the ways they were able to drop the overall CPI was by taking on balance the lowering and dropping of gas prices, which the White House, again, is so very proud of touting as if it was something that they actually did, after telling us for months and months on end that they can't do much with gas prices. The executive can only do so much. They can't just lower gas prices. But apparently they could take credit for it when it does drop. So why did gas prices drop? Gas prices dropped because, surprise, surprise, Americans are driving less, because the price at the pump is still higher than it was over a year ago. And of course, what happens in pricing in commodities, it's always a delayed reaction to the price. The reflection in price is always a reaction to the market. It does not generally pre-act, if that's a word, act before something happens, unless you're talking about the stock market, which is a different thing. But when it comes to prices of commodities, the reason gas has lowered, it's not because the war in Ukraine is looking better. It's not because Biden has opened up a bunch of drilling wells and his outlook on fossil fuels has changed so that the entire fossil fuel industry is now very... They look with favor upon the future. That has nothing to do with it. It's because people quit driving as much. When diesel is $7 a gallon, of course you're not going to drive very much. What we're seeing now is a delayed reaction to that drop in driving miles. So I've got an article here from Bloomberg. I'll just read a little bit of it. Americans are driving less, combining errands and shopping, or driving out less, or dining out less since gas prices railed in March, according to a survey by the Auto Club AAA. A survey of 1,002 U.S. adults, which, okay, first of all, your AAA, you probably have millions of drivers at your disposal, and you're only going to survey 1,000? Weird, but excuse me. But I digress. 1,002 U.S. adults last month showed 64% of Americans adapted their driving or lifestyle habits in response to high fuel prices. Of these, 88% said they drove less, 74% said they combined errands, while more than half reduced shopping or restaurant visits. Many Americans have also postponed taking a vacation this year, according to that survey. Slowing demand on the weaker global market drove average gas prices in the U.S. lower for 41 straight days, including the single biggest weekly drop in almost 14 years. But at $4.355 a gallon on average, prices still are 30% higher than they were a year ago. So we're talking a year ago. So we're talking August 2021. What was happening during August 2021? You telling me that even with the massive lowering of COVID restrictions, and I think overall in general the American public just kind of being over the entire thing, people are going out to continue their lives and so on and so forth, but they're not. You're telling me that today's level of driving is that much less or greater or equal to what it was a year ago when COVID insanity was damn near at the height of things. I have a hard time managing that on balance in my head. I don't understand how people can say that right now, because I think right now there are more than everybody else, for the most part in society, they're going out to restaurants again. They're doing the things within their capabilities due to inflation, with how much money they have. Everything is more expensive, so your dollar is worth less than it ever has been before. So people are doing what they can, taking different trips, smaller trips. That is something we've seen too. Taking a little weekend trip vacations versus taking a week or two off from work and going out and doing the whole shebang. Or they're doing that after trying to save up over the last 2 years when they weren't able to go out and do these vacations themselves. So it's a good thing that we see the price of gas dropping at this point, but it's not a sign that inflation is getting better. The oil market itself and the fuel market is one of those things that is a heavy weight on average when the Fed and the federal government calculates the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, because it is one of the most, I want to say expensive, but it's one of the largest chunks of money the American people put into the economy, because it drives everything. Fuel delivers your groceries. It makes the trains run on time. It makes commerce possible in our modern era. We have a huge boom in the e-commerce world and people working remotely and stuff like that. But the vast majority of people still have to drive to work. They still have to drive to the grocery store. They still have to drive to their restaurants. They still have to drive up to go see their friends and their family. I mean, all of this thing is all still, it's such a huge chunk when you're putting it on balance with the CPI. So other than that, I'm not an economist, so I don't want to pontificate too highly on it, but a drop in gas prices is not a sign that inflation is getting better, particularly when we start talking about the additional spending that was just done, as we'll get later on in the segment. The next thing I wanted to bring up as it pertains to inflation, where did my mouse go? I lost my mouse, 2 screens. The Fed, after the last Fed's meeting, the Federal Reserve is still, as ING puts it, Federal Reserve minutes, higher. Their concern is higher, but not too high. Inflation is higher, but it's not too high. I don't know what these people really think about when they're talking about what is too high inflation and what is not. I mean, it's these people, the Federal Reserve. I'm not going to get started on my disdain for these people, but these are the people that control the flow of money everywhere throughout our entire economy. Let me get caught up on the chat here before we dive into this one. I miss the days when Trump just flat out told us we were staying there because we love the oil. Hey, Bilbo, that was real deal, bro. Say what you want about T-Dog Millionaire, but if he had something to say, silence was a lie. He was just going to say it. We need to audit the Federal Reserve immediately. I disagree with you entirely, Bilbo Swaggins. I don't think we should audit the Federal Reserve. I think we should completely not only disband the Federal Reserve and go back to some form of a hard currency control like gold or something like that. But no, I'm not into auditing the Federal Reserve. It does not deserve to exist anymore. The evil that these people have done to the American people and on balance the entire world is so terrible. They just need to be gone. We just need to wipe that building right there. Let's just, I don't know. Let's make it a new prison so we could throw all the politicians in it. That would be cool. So anyways, after the last meeting of the Fed board, they continued to raise rates as was reported. I think they raised another 0.75 basis points or something like that, which is a 0.75%. Make the dollar worth something again. Donavan, shout out in the chat. Thanks for stopping by, buddy. I hope you are starting to feel good. But according to the minutes, they are still looking at doing another rate hike when they meet again, I believe in September. Another probably 50 basis points and then maybe another 25 in December. But we will see how that goes. The Fed obviously is concerned about raising rates too high, which would It's hard to explain. I'm probably not the best person to try and explain this, but if you raise interest rates enough, that means that when you take out loans, when people take up more loans and stuff like that, that money becomes more expensive over time. And so there's less credit given because it's more expensive to have, and that helps lower inflation because there's less money being put out there, and so on and so forth. But the concern, they say, which I think is completely unwarranted anymore, is that if they were to raise interest rates too high, it would trigger a recession. But if there's one thing that we've learned over the last couple of months, is that recession, like anything else, is just kind of whatever you want it to be. Recession isn't even a real thing anymore. It's something that a group of experts, they all meet together and they look over the last couple of years of financials and say, oh yeah, that was a recession. It's no longer 2 straight quarters of negative growth in the overall American economy. That's just out the window now. So I don't know. They don't have anything to be afraid of. But 3 main takeaways and how it affects the market. I wanted to read through these real quick. The Fed thinks that the real rates are still too low, talking about their setting of interest rate percentages, even as they deem the nominal Fed funds rate as being now at essentially a neutral level, which is interesting. Neutral, I feel like, would be 0, but that's okay. Ammunition, therefore, expectations for level. Ammunition, therefore, expectations for higher. I don't know who wrote this thing. Higher nominal market rates, even though the impact reaction has been to test lower for rates and for the belly of the curve to be richened. So they're still concerned essentially about raising rates too high, and they think right now they are too high, but they're not too high. They're neutral levels. We don't want to kickstart this thing into a recession if we don't want. The Fed seems to be all over the place when assessing where financial conditions are. Fact check, true. Janet Yellen has the former Fed chair, and then Jerome Powell, the current Fed chair. They've both been in front of Congress over the last month and have said that they had made mistakes. They didn't see the signs, blah, blah, blah. They all suck at their job. I don't understand why they're still in their jobs, especially Secretary Yellen, who is a politically appointee to the Treasury. She doesn't need to have a job. All Joe Biden's got to do is say, you suck at your job, you're fired. Although he should probably do that with a lot of people. Next, the Fed seems happy with the function of the reserve repo window, at which there is a 2.3% rate on offer. So this is the rate that the Fed is selling our money, essentially in bonds and debts and things like that. They also note that the doubling in the balance sheet roll-off volumes in the months ahead should ease the usage on the facility. We are currently beginning to see this, as the usage seems to have placated, albeit from struggling higher levels. So yeah, there you go. The Fed talking nonsense. They're going to raise rates again and hopefully not trigger a worse recession than I'm pretty sure everybody in America can identify that we're already in. About to head off another nap. Had to stop by. Keep killing it. Stay free. I will see you all next episode. Thanks for stopping by, my G. I hope you are feeling better. So, a little update on inflation. There you go. Inflation is still kicking. It is still high. Gas prices are lower because people are driving less, because it's still expensive as hell. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act, unfortunately, was signed into law this past week, which, as we will explain as we go further, has nothing to do with inflation, lowering inflation. If anything, it literally just is going to make it worse. So, CBS News reports President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law at the White House on Tuesday, finalizing a signature piece of legislation aimed at fighting climate change, lowering health costs, and raising taxes on corporations just before the midterm elections. So right there, Inflation Reduction Act doesn't affect inflation. It fights climate change, lowers healthcare costs, and raises taxes. Cool. I'm so glad we're calling it the Inflation Reduction Act. The House and Senate passed the bill along party lines last week, a.k.a. very little to no Republicans voted for it, after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuckie Schumer struck a deal after many months of negotiations. Both senators were on hand for Tuesday's signing ceremony. Quote, "Let me say this from the start. With this law, the American people won and special interests lost," Mr. Biden told the crowd assembled at the White House. The president had two quiet cabinet members of Congress, and staff in the audience as they continue to cheer and clap well after he took the lectern, because he's so popular. Nobody can hold back. They have to just outpour this love and elation towards this man who is not winning for the American people and is definitely giving special interests a lot of money in this bill. Particularly Joe Manchin, that deal that they mentioned, Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer, it had to do with getting some fossil fuel deals done down in West Virginia, where Joe Manchin is the senator, and so that is very important to him. And so once him and Chuckie Schumer kind of made that deal, he decided to sign on to the rest of it, because I guess Joe Manchin says the rest of the country, as long as I can get what I want in West Virginia, I don't really care what else is happening. Let's continue on here. The bill passage was many months in the making and at times appeared unlikely with the 50-50 Senate and midterm elections fast approaching. It accomplishes long-held democratic goals on lowering prescription drug costs, investing in transitions to clean energy, and reforming the nation's tax code. It also massively boosts the nation's tax collectors. We'll get into that a little bit further. Quote, "I was one of the few truly historic days in the 30 years I have spent in Congress," House Democratic Whip Jim Clyburn said, alongside Biden praising the president's legislative accomplishments. Senator Chuck Schumer said the law came amid, quote, "one of the most productive stretches in Senate history, in which Democrats passed gun control, expanded care for veterans exposed to burn pits, and gave themselves a bunch of massive spending along with that is totally discretionary, and provided billions of dollars in subsidies to boost U.S. production of semiconductors." Schumer, too, praised the president for steering the Inflation Reduction Act across the line. Quote, "I am confident this bill will endure as one of the greatest legislative feats in decades," Schumer said, adding that it was the most important bill we have passed in a long time. It gave a lot of money to a lot of people, and they're going to go ahead and detail some of the bullshit that was supposedly where all this money's going. But I got it right here. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The Inflation Reduction Act 2022 will make a historic down payment on deficit reduction to fight inflation. Yeah, that's how you do that. Invest in domestic energy production and manufacturing and reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by by 2030. The bill will also finally allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices and extend the expanded Affordable Care Act program for 3 years through 2025. Additionally, the agreement calls for comprehensive permitting reform legislation to be passed before the end of the fiscal year. Permitting reform is essentially to unlock domestic energy and transmission projects, which will lower costs for consumers and help us meet our long-term emissions goals. So the top line estimates. This is the real meat and potatoes. So we have a 15% corporate minimum tax, which is estimated $222 billion. That's how they're paying for this thing, by raising corporate taxes to a minimum of 15%, which, if you know anything about the leaders of giant corporations, they will find a way to pay as little of that as possible. Prescription drug pricing reform. Apparently, $265 billion of that is going to that. This is my favorite one, the IRS tax enforcement. So this is what you've seen, the rhetoric online. You've seen the 56,000, 57,000 new IRS agents, so on and so forth. I highly doubt that's actually what it's going to be. But there's $124 billion going to the IRS. And I've seen stories about big modernization updates. And yes, Bilbo, all the corporate tax will do is raise consumer prices. Yeah, because that's how businesses work. And anybody with two eyes anybody that knows anything about basic economics can understand that. If you raise taxes on businesses, the person that will feel that is the consumer on the bottom end. That is how that works, especially at a corporate level where they have a legal fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to make them fucking money. This is what drives me nuts about this. It's a nonsensical way to just put us deeper in the hole to spend more money that we will never get a return on. This is insane. The conveniently timed for midterms. There's no convenience behind it. This was strategically done right before midterms because it sounds good to their base when they want it. But the IRS tax, they're getting $124 billion from tax enforcement, supposedly. So the vast amount of money that they're going to be boosting at the IRS will supposedly just bring in more money somehow. They're going to their point of view on it is they're going to be going after those cheating millionaires and billionaires that aren't paying their fair share. And nobody that makes, no family or small business that makes less than $400,000 a year will be targeted by the IRS. Bullshit. Bullshit. There's absolutely no way that this is going to do anything except for affect the everyday normal working American who will simply just get a additional bill after doing their taxes from the IRS that says, oh, hey, actually you owe us this much money. Or, hey, instead of the $1,600 in a rebate that you're going to get $25. Or actually you owe us another $125. And people are just going to pay that. They're going to extort all this extra money from the American people. And this is criminal. Taxation is theft, and I think we all know this. The IRS has been spending over $600K a year on ammunition for a few years now. Yeah, they got to stock up for when a small business owner, because he can't afford a giant high-priced tax attorney and an entire accounting firm to do his taxes, when there's $150 missing, they can cart you off in chains, like the videos we've been watching on Twitter and social media go around for the last couple of weeks. This wonderful college training program that they have for the IRS, where all these fat, overweight people that are coming in their big old vests and they're holding fake guns and it's just disgusting. But yes, this is going to come down to you and me. They're going to come after us because we don't have the money and the wherewithal to defend ourselves from the giant machine that is the IRS. They are coming for your money, and they're going to get it, or they're going to throw you in a cage, because that's what they do. And that's disgusting. The IRS should not exist, period. But carrying on with this lovely Inflation Act, bill 1% stock buyback fees. So every time now there's a piece of legislation in this giant omnibus bullshit package that will essentially add an additional tax to anybody that is buying back a stock. This is a thing that happens a lot in corporate environments, or even medium to large size companies. If you have some form of a dividend payment, or if you're in a profit sharing situation, a lot of times you can just buy more stock instead of getting a cash out, and that overall will just raise the more ownership you have in the company, and it'll become worth. It's a type of investment, but they're going to add an addition or 1% fee. They want to add on to that because they probably can't call it a tax, but because they already tax everything else. The loss limitation extension, I'm not real familiar on that one. I mean, to me, it's basically just the tax code of America is so fucking complicated and complex for a reason. The reason it's not a simple thing that any normal person can understand is because they need to find legal ways to extort every penny out of your pocket, out of your business, out of your paycheck. And this is just more spending to that point. The investments that they're spending, energy security and climate change. This is the big one. It is almost $400 billion, $369 billion. And this is going to be in, and I love how they do this. They do this in what they call tax benefits, or what's the word? I'm blanking on the word, but tax credits. There you go. So you go out and you buy yourself a brand new Tesla because you're a upper middle class. You're an upper middle class person who can afford a $75,000 new car, plus your increased energy costs for maintaining that car. You're going to go out and do that, and you're going to get I believe it's $7,500 tax credit for a brand new, and then a $4,000 tax credit for a used, except for the fact that doesn't apply to Tesla. You can't do that. You have to buy one of the bullshit ones. You might be able to get away with that Revia, the electric truck, which I'm actually kind of a fan of. I don't want to hate on that thing, but yeah. So you can get a tax write-off essentially for spending more money, which is just obviously great for the environment. The Affordable Care Act extension. There's more to that energy security and climate change stuff, but it's basically just a giant giveaway to solar panel companies and wind farm companies and all the shit that has really no effect on anybody else in America except for the people that are already in those businesses. The Obama administration had tried just once back during his term, and the company went bankrupt anyways. So I have a feeling we're going to be doing the same exact thing here. Either that, or we're just going to be bankrolling China because they're the ones that generally make all of our solar panels anyways. So, and that kind of checks true when it comes to Biden's relationship with China anyways. So yeah, we'll see that. And obviously they're going to tout some of these things here towards the bottom, but the Affordable Care Act extension, it's another few-year extension into 2025, which they say lowers people's overall buy-in into the ACA. They say on average will save them approximately $800 a year, which I don't know if you could do the math, but you divide that by 12 per month. So let's just go ahead and do that real quick, because I'm not about to try to do that in my head while we're live. Divide. That saves you $66 a month. Man, that's really going to help you save on inflation. And that's only if you're a member of the ACA. If you participate in the Affordable Care Act marketplace, which is already insanely expensive. If you do not have employer-provided health care, if you don't have some kind of privatized healthcare system thing going on, you're spending for a generally healthy individual between like $500 to $800 a month on like the most basic bullshit package that doesn't give you any kind of true sense of financial safety if something was to happen to you, because you still have like a $5,000 to $8,000 deductible, which you're not going to be able to pay anyways, because who the hell can? People can't afford $1,000 or $500 emergency right now if something happened like that. It's nonsensical. But yeah, so congratulations. They saved those people that are enrolled in the ACA approximately $66 a month. That's awesome. So let's see. They tout a couple of the individual things here. The expansion of Medicaid benefits, free vaccines, 2023. That's what's up, I guess. $35 a month insulin, and caps out-of-pocket drug costs to an estimated $4,000 or less in 2024, and settling at $2,000 in 2025. I got a real problem with how Medicare is run and what Medicare is as a institution, because it is an institution. It's basically a government subsidized form of healthcare insurance, health insurance, we'll put it that way, that is totally run by the U.S. government. And when they get involved in the markets, they obviously have more money than anybody else to spend in that market. And so just by participating in that market alone, they're already skyrocketing the price for everyone else that isn't involved with that. And because they are the government, they always have really deep pockets. These companies charge them insane prices. And yeah, if Medicaid is allowed to, or if Medicare is allowed to negotiate their own prices, all that really means is that instead of, say, being $1,000 for a drug, they might get it down to $900, when if it was a total free market, it might cost $50. Like, you just take a look at any kind of name brand drug compared to anything that's generic. I mean, it is 1,000 times less in cost than anything else. Go down to Mexico. Your basic antibiotics and things like that I mean, you go in and they're dirt cheap. They sell them right out of the pharmacy. That is true free market capitalism at play when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry. Lowers energy bills, cuts energy costs by $500 to $1,000 per year. I don't understand how. All you're doing is dumping a ton of money into systems that don't pay for themselves and don't create enough energy to even come close to paying for themselves. I mean, we see this in Washington State right now. We have, particularly in eastern Washington, if you're not familiar with the geography, there's a Cascade Mountain Range that separates essentially western Washington, eastern Washington. Eastern Washington, about 3/4 of the state, and then you have basically the Pacific Northwest area, that's Seattle, all the way down to Oregon. It's all the same type of environment. But over on the east side, they have massive wind farms, and you drive out there, and most of the time, they're never active. They just sit there. There's absolutely no way to make the energy and the cost that the cost to make the energy, there's no way to actually hit neutral or have that actually be a good energy investment. So I have zero concept how they're saying this is going to reduce your energy bill. It's just, they can just say whatever they want and it makes it okay. They make historic climate investments that reduce carbon emissions by 40% in 2030. I don't know how they can claim that unless there's some form of, cutting down on carbon creating industries right now, which obviously they didn't do because they just gave West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin access for more of that stuff. So that's great. Creates manufacturing jobs. More than $60 billion will be invested, will create millions of new domestic clean manufacturing jobs. Again, I call shenanigans, because the government doesn't know how to create jobs except at the IRS. What this does is it subsidizes a bunch of private industry who they are anticipating will then have a giant boom to their industry. They will be forced to hire more people, creating millions of new clean, domestic clean manufacturing jobs, which is just a bunch of bullshit. Invest in disadvantaged communities, clean up pollution, and taking steps to reducing environmental injustice with $60 billion for environmental justice. Try and sell that one to me. That makes sense. I don't put $60 billion for environmental justice. Cool. Clean up pollution. Always a good idea. I'm always a huge fan of that. Let's see. Bilbo Swag. Oh, wifey's in the chat. What up, baby girl? Thanks for stopping by. Bilbo. With this bill, they are going to put windmills in the Gulf of Mexico. However, there is no windmill in existence that can withstand yeah, fact check true. Windmills do not work at high speed. These wind turbines, if you will, they do not work at high speed. They're incredibly fragile. Not to mention they devastate the bird population. Not that birds are real. Conspiracy theory. But yeah, let's get back to this thing here. I don't understand this disadvantaged community. $60 billion for environmental justice. Somebody please explain to me what environmental justice is. But I mean, if we're going to clean up some pollution, that sounds cool. I don't like pollution. I like to spend time out in the woods, man. I'm into that. There's also only 13 ships in the world that are able to move the blades for those windmills and that are owned by foreign countries. Yeah, I've heard that before, Bilbo. That's wild. That doesn't surprise me because we don't believe in making anything in America. We basically made it all illegal for most industry to be here. So it doesn't surprise me that it's probably China or probably one of the Scandinavian countries. They do a lot of like the most giant oil tanking ships all over the world. They all come from like, Rotterdam and some of those Norwegian countries like that. If I remember correctly, when I wrote my paper against windmills, that was a huge thing. A lot of birds get affected by those things. So much for environmental justice. Yeah, I don't. Environmental justice. Yeah, that's a massive injustice to the birds, man. And we got a bird problem already. I went down this bird rabbit hole once, and it got really unhealthy. I found out that there's like over 1 billion birds per year die just by flying into windows. I'm like, that's too many birds, man. That's not real. Turns out there's a hell of a lot more birds than 1 billion birds in the world. So yeah, over 1 billion birds die a year just by flying into windows, and that's crazy. Oh, so we get back into the tax stuff here. Closes tax loopholes used by the wealthy, a 50% corporate tax and a 1% fee on stock buybacks, and enhanced IRS enforcement. Protects families and small businesses making $400,000 or less. Yeah, that's not going to happen. The IRS is going to come screw you out of more money. That's exactly what's going to happen. And if anybody tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. Because if there's one thing the IRS does not want to do, it's get involved in insanely expensive, long, drawn-out legal battles with people that have money enough to hire the most expensive lawyers and the most expensive tax firms to fight against them. Why would they do that? They're going to come after the people that can't defend themselves, like you and me. They're just going to send you another bill in the mail, and you're going to pay it. And if you can't pay it, you're going to have to go broke trying to defend yourself. Or I don't know how that whole thing works. I don't know if there's payment programs and stuff the IRS plans for people so they can just milk you out of money from your paycheck for the rest of your life. I don't know. But either way, they're lying, and it's coming right to you. Next on the agenda, the IRS just got an $80 billion beef up, a bigger goal going after rich tax dodgers. Yeah, like my ass. But I had to bring this up because it's an NPR article, which, means that they're very, very friendly to the regime, and they obviously need to spread their message far and wide. The IRS is about to get a big infusion of cash as part of the massive climate and health care bill. They don't even call it an Inflation Reduction Act in the NPR article. As soon as it was passed, we're like, all right, let's just call this thing what it is. It's inflation, or it's climate, and it's healthcare, and it's also we're coming after the rich people that don't pay their fair share in taxes. So, sorry, I digress. As part of the massive climate and healthcare bill passed by the House on Friday, the tax collections agency is set to receive $80 billion over the next decade. Some of the money will go to update decades-old computer systems at the IRS. I have heard stories, actually, as an aside, from kind of insiders that a lot of these computers and stuff aren't even networked together. So they can't even do something as simple as having like a Microsoft Teams chat or a Slack channel or something like that. It all has to be done via like old school email, or heaven forbid somebody calls somebody else on their extension. And some is for improving customer service, including a taxpayer phone line where 9 out of 10 calls go unanswered. Yes, if you were one of those people that had problems getting your stimmies, you ran into that problem where you just couldn't get a hold of somebody even after 3 hours on hold. Most of the money, though, is for stepped up enforcement to help the IRS collect more of the estimated $600 billion in taxes that go unpaid every year, which much of it owned by rich people who underreport their income. So again, this is how you know this is a lie, because not only do they have to prove that these people underreported their income, they then have to fight them in court to make that legally the case, and then they can go after them after some form of settlement to reduce the overall amount that they owe. Quote, by beefing up the IRS capacity to go after wealthy tax cheats, we're going to be able to collect at least $400 billion. So right there, they're already writing off $200 billion of this over the course of the next 10 years. And I suspect substantially more, says Natasha Sarin, a counselor for tax policy and implementation at the Treasury Department. But there's a bitter opposition from Republicans and everyday Americans who despise the IRS. If there is one institution out there every single American can get behind getting rid of, it's the fucking IRS. Nobody likes the IRS except for people who work for the IRS. The IRS or don't understand how it works and have never been subject to their ire before. The IRS funding passed Congress along strict party lines, aka Republicans barely voted for it, like the rest of the Inflation Reduction Act. Quote, imagine IRS agents descending upon America like a swarm of locusts, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas warned in an interview with Fox Business. And by the way, these IRS agents aren't there to go after billionaires. They're going to come after you. They're there to go after your small business. They're there to go after your family. Fact check true. I hate to give it to old Teddy Cruz, but he ain't wrong on that one. Both Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig, who was appointed by former President Trump, insist the additional enforcement efforts will target the wealthy, not middle-class taxpayers. So I'm sure they'll target a lot of people. Quote, let's be very clear about these resources are what these resources are and are not doing. Sarin said, these resources are not raising audits on any small business because they wouldn't waste the money. They'll just send you the bill. Or any household that makes under $400,000 a year. Again, they're not going to audit you. They're just going to send you the bill. And if you don't pay it, then there's the courts for that, and they don't have to spend that money in court because you're going to be doing most of the spending in court. The IRS had lacked financial resources. The money will help to reserve more than a decade of underfunding at the IRS. The agency enforcement ranks have shrunk by 30% since 2010. Thank God. Good. This is not a bad thing. Not every single government institution needs to exist. Like I said at the top show, I could recognize the reality of the government that we live in and the various institutions that all control us and have authority over how we live our lives. But this is not one that needs to exist. If anybody does any history into the existence of the IRS and the collection of taxes, you don't have to go back that far to realize this is all a very brand new thing, and this is very unnormal as it compares to American history. We don't need this, nor should we have it. The only reason it exists is so that these people can continue to steal money from us more efficiently and make sure Nancy Pelosi can keep making insider trades. So, enough of this. I don't want to talk about these people anymore. They're all a bunch of idiots. I'm tired of them. It's all bad. The Inflation Reduction Act is a lie and always has been since the start. So I guess in closing for this little part of the segment, there is nothing about the Inflation Reduction Act that actually has an effect on inflation that will do anything to lower it. We've gone over a couple of the small savings that everyday Americans that take advantage of certain government programs will be privy to. If you are in Medicaid or Medicare, you might have slightly reduced drug prices going into the future. If you're a member of the Affordable Care Act, you'll have, $66 less in premiums. That's okay. That's cool. So from $680 a month to $620 a month. That sounds great. And other than that, the big deal is a massive corporate buyout for the green industry and a massive boost in spending to the IRS. So really what we have here is a mass amount of spending, which, as anybody should know, we've covered it here before on the show, the more money the government spends, the higher inflation is going to be. This is not going to have a positive effect on society's perceived. It's a weird thing to say because positive and negative goes up and down. This is going to make inflation go up. Period. That's it. That's the long and short of it. Inflation is not going to be dampened at all by this ridiculous facade of a bill. It's just climate spending and boosting government spending. Done. So now let's go ahead and talk about Ukraine. Because keeping with our theme of spend, we're going to take a look at kind of some pushback that was given by the president of Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky. He had responded in an interview with, I believe, Piers Morgan, did an interview with him and his wife, but generally has been responding that Americans being unhappy with the continued amount of financial support to Ukraine. He had some things to say about that. So this is an article from Newsweek, which isn't generally a very reliable source anymore, but they do have nice quotes from him, so I'm just going to go ahead and ride with those. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Americans balked at the cost of U.S. support for Kyiv's fight against Russian aggression. Should keep in mind, quote, "We are fighting for absolutely communal values." I mean, we're fighting for the same values that you would be fighting for. Essentially, by funding us, we're fighting for you. In an interview with journalist and broadcaster Piers Morgan, Zelensky was asked whether he was worried that Americans might be concerned at the amount Washington was spending in its military support for Kyiv's forces. In June, inflation over the previous 12 months hit 9.1. We discussed that earlier, its highest level since 1981. In May, President Joe Biden signed a $40 billion support packages from Ukraine, and U.S. supply of M1842 high mobility artillery rocket systems, or the HERMS, has made a difference on the battlefield against Ukraine. So long and short of this story here is Zelensky's pushing back against the amount of Americans that are pushing back against the spending going on in Ukraine. It seems like every other week, Joe Biden is signing another piece of legislation that is sending more money to Ukraine. So I happened to find this nifty little document here that details some of the actual spending in Ukraine. All the security assistance that's going to this. This is from the Congressional Research Service. And this breaks down by the numbers what we've been sending to them for the entire fiscal year. So this is going back before the Russian invasion in February. So we have, over the last year, since last August, we have sent them $6.3 billion worth of assistance in one way or another. Just in August alone, almost over half a billion dollars, $550 million. July, $175 million. $575 million in total for July. Even more than that. Good Lord. So we sent them money in July 3 different times, one for $50 million, $400 million, and $175 million. June, we sent them 3 times, $700 million, $350 million, $450 million. May, twice. That was it. That was a low month for us, $150 million and $100 million. Let's take a look. February, sent them $350 million. March, $200 million. March 16th, $800 million. Oh my gosh. So you might ask, how are we spending this $6.3 billion? Well, they happen to have a little breakdown of what it was that they sent them. We have 2 National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, 16 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, those HERMS, and ammunition. Over 1,400 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, over 6,500 Javelin anti-air systems, and over 20,000 other anti-armor systems, 700 plus Phoenix Ghost tactical unmanned aerial. What is the UAS? They're drones. The system, unmanned aerial system. That might be it. But yeah, 2 different kinds. We sent them over 700 of the Ghost Phoenix Tactical and the Switchblade Tactical. 126 155 millimeter howitzers with almost a 500,000 artillery rounds, 20 Mi-17 helicopters, which I think are essentially Russian helicopters, I'm pretty sure. Hundreds of armored Humvee vehicles, 200 M113 armored personnel carriers. So those are like little boxy looking tanks. We have over 10,000 small arms and 59 million rounds of ammunition, laser-guided rocket systems, and other essential non-lethal equipment, including communications and intelligence equipment. Woo! Again, inflation much? Now, this is done on a little bit different tilt than our standard spending. Any kind of money that we send them, any kind of goods that we send them are done under what's called the Lend-Lease program, which means the minute we do that, we are financially invested in the future of the outcome, because what that means is essentially these are all loans that we are giving them in one way or another, even if we're just sending them weapons and things like that made in America. We're just shipping it to them. All that cost, Raytheon still gets paid. Boeing still gets paid. All these people still get paid. The government takes on the debt in agreements with the Ukrainians that will be paid back. So by that effect, we got $6.3 billion invested in the positive outcome of Ukraine still existing on the back end of this war. I don't know what amount in dollars that would require us to ensure that they win. But we'll put it this way. If Russia was to have somehow marched right into Kyiv and taken over the entire country, we were not getting that money back because Ukraine as a sovereign nation doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, there you go. There's a nice little tidbit of more spending. This will do nothing for inflation but make it worse for us everyday Americans. And yeah, that just seems to be the tact of the current regime, is if there's a problem, let's throw money at it, and then the American people in our voting base will love us for it. And they're too stupid to realize that for every dollar we spend, for every extra dollar we create out there, it will devalue their dollar more and more and more. So with that, I am going to bring this segment to a close and take a little break skis. But before I do that, I wanted to do something a little different here. I wanted to bring on what I call a palate cleanser. And so this is a 40-second video from the great and powerful Dave Portnoy, who is a fantastic Twitter follow for all of his hot takes, for all of his silly videos and everything. You should make sure to follow him. But I'm going to read this first part of the tweet because it happens really quick, so it's really hard to read it in time to watch the video. But he shows a tweet from ABC first that says, police say a homeless man in Florida with no arms has been arrested for stabbing a tourist with scissors using his feet. And then they show a picture of him. And on that note, I will roll the video and then we'll go into our first break.
Looking style looks pretty good right there. Cut it in fours, did a little drizz on it.
And don't forget to give it to a crack addict. That's all we got on the beach, crack addict.
How's he pulling that? How's he pulling that? Is it hooked? Listen, I rarely get left speechless. I was left speechless by that guy.